The tears streamed down Clara Barton's cheeks as she stumbled through the dusty main street of Georgetown, Colorado, clutching the crumpled eviction notice in her trembling hand. Spring of 1876 had arrived with cruel indifference to her suffering, the mountain air still carrying a bite despite the sunshine that bathed the mining town nestled in the foothills of the Rockies. Her father's sudden passing 2 weeks prior had left her alone, penniless, and now homeless. "Would you look at that?" A mocking voice called from the boardwalk. "Old man Barton's girl is crying again." Clara quickened her pace, but the jeers followed her like persistent flies. Georgetown had never been kind to outsiders, and though she and her father had lived there for 3 years, they'd always remained strangers in the eyes of the townsfolk. "What's the matter, darlin'? Can't pay your debts?" Another voice called, followed by cruel laughter. Clara clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, focusing on the ground before her. Her father had invested everything they had in a silver mine claim that had yielded nothing before consumption took him. Now at 22, she was alone with nothing but a handful of possessions and nowhere to go. "She'll be working at Madame Ruby's by sundown," someone else shouted, triggering another round of laughter that burned Clara's ears. She couldn't hold back the sob that escaped her lips, which only encouraged their taunting. The banker had given her until tomorrow to vacate the small cabin she'd called home, and she had no prospects, no family to turn to. "That's enough." The deep voice cut through the jeers like a knife. Clara looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a tall figure step down from a magnificent chestnut stallion. The crowd quieted immediately. He stood with the easy confidence of a man who rarely needed to raise his voice to be heard. Dusty from the trail but immaculately dressed in a black vest over a crisp white shirt, dark trousers tucked into well-worn boots, and a black Stetson that shaded piercing blue eyes. "I believe the lady deserves your respect, not your mockery," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "Mind your business, stranger," one of the men grumbled. "That's just Clara Barton. Her daddy died owing half the town money." The stranger's gaze found Clara's, and something in those eyes made her straighten her spine despite her distress. "Is that so?" He stepped closer to Clara, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Lucas Vaughn, madam. Recently arrived from San Antonio." He turned to face the crowd again. "And I'd wager that before sundown today, you'll be making this lady laugh instead of cry." A scoff rose from the onlookers. "And how do you figure that, cowboy?" someone challenged. Lucas Vaughn's mouth curved into a confident smile. "Because I aim to make it so." He offered Clara his arm. "May I escort you somewhere, Miss Barton?" Clara hesitated, every instinct warning her against trusting this handsome stranger. Yet something in his steady gaze offered more comfort than she'd felt in weeks. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted quietly, her voice breaking. "Then perhaps we should remedy that first," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "My horse can carry two." With the town's eyes upon them, Clara made a decision that would change the course of her life. She placed her hand on his offered arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn," she whispered. "Lucas, please," he corrected, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "And you can thank me when you're laughing." With that, he clicked his tongue, and the chestnut stallion moved forward, carrying them away from the jeering crowd and toward an uncertain future that suddenly felt less bleak than it had moments before. Clara sat stiffly, acutely aware of the stranger's chest at her back as they rode. The townsfolk's stares followed them down the main street, past the assayer's office and the mercantile until they reached the Georgetown Hotel, the finest establishment in town. "Why are we stopping here?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Because," Lucas said as he dismounted and offered his hand to help her down. "A lady deserves a proper meal and a chance to collect herself before making any decisions." The hotel dining room fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to the unlikely pair, the disheveled, red-eyed daughter of a failed miner and the imposing, well-dressed stranger. Clara felt her cheeks burn with shame at her appearance. Lucas led her to a table by the window, pulling out her chair with the grace of someone accustomed to fine society. As they settled, he signaled to a waiter who hurried over. "2 of your finest meals, please, and coffee," Lucas ordered, then looked to Clara. "Unless you prefer tea?" "Coffee is fine," Clara murmured, keeping her eyes downcast. Mr. Vaughn, Lucas, I appreciate your kindness, but I have no means to repay you. His expression softened. I'm not looking for repayment, Miss Barton. Clara, she corrected automatically. Clara, he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her heart flutter unexpectedly. I arrived in Georgetown this morning with business in mind. I've purchased the old Davidson property at the edge of town. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. The Davidson ranch had been sitting empty for nearly a year after the family moved east. It was a beautiful piece of land with a sturdy house and good grazing fields. You're planning to ranch? She asked, genuine curiosity momentarily displacing her sorrow. Lucas nodded, a spark lighting his blue eyes. Cattle primarily, but I have other interests as well. I'm looking to build something here. He paused, studying her face. Which brings me to a proposition, if you'll hear it. Clara tensed, instantly wary. Propositions from men rarely benefited women in her experience. Reading her expression, Lucas quickly added, a business proposition, nothing more. I need someone who knows this town, someone who can help manage the household while I get established. I understand you've been here 3 years. Yes, Clara confirmed cautiously. Though as you've seen, I'm not exactly beloved by the locals. The waiter brought their coffee, and Lucas thanked him before continuing. Their loss, I'd say. But tell me, what did you do while your father worked his claim? Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I kept our home, did seamstress work for some of the mining families. Before coming west, I was a teacher's assistant in Pennsylvania. Educated, then, Lucas noted with approval. Can you read, write, keep accounts? Yes, my mother insisted on my education before she passed. Father continued it as best he could. Clara took a sip of coffee, the rich flavor warming her from the inside. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Vaughn? Lucas, he reminded her with a gentle smile. I need a housekeeper and secretary. Someone to manage correspondence, keep the books, and oversee the domestic aspects of the ranch while I handle the outdoor operations. I can offer room, board, and a fair wage. Clara studied him carefully. Why me? You don't know anything about me. I know that a woman who faces public ridicule with the dignity you showed has character. I know that someone who cares enough to weep for their circumstances isn't defeated by them. His eyes held her steadily. And frankly, I believe in helping those who need it when I can. The food arrived: tender beef, fresh vegetables, and freshly baked bread more substantial than anything Clara had eaten in weeks. As they ate, Lucas outlined his vision for the ranch, his plans to introduce better breeding stock to the area, and his ideas for expanding into other ventures as the town grew. Clara found herself drawn into the conversation despite her reservations. There was something magnetic about Lucas Vaughn's confidence, his clear-eyed vision of the future. By the time they finished their meal, she had learned he was 30 years old, had ranched in Texas for most of his life, and had come to Colorado seeking new opportunities after the death of his parents left him with a substantial inheritance. So, Miss Barton, he said as the waiter cleared their plates, what do you say? Will you accept my offer of employment? Clara took a deep breath. She had few options, none as promising as this one. Still, caution tempered her desperation. I would need to maintain my own quarters, she stated firmly, and I would want the terms of employment written clearly. Lucas nodded approvingly. Of course. The Davidson place has a separate cabin for the foreman that would suit you, perfectly private, but close enough to the main house for convenience. As for terms, we can draw those up this afternoon if you wish. Clara considered for another moment. Very well, Mr. Vaughn. I accept your offer. His smile warmed his entire face. Excellent. Now, is there anything you need to collect from your current residence? Just a few personal belongings, Clara admitted. My father's books, my mother's sewing kit, some clothing. Then we'll retrieve those now, and you can be settled at the ranch before sundown. He rose, offering his hand to help her from her chair. And I believe I made a promise about you laughing before day's end. For the first time that day, Clara felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. That seems unlikely, given the circumstances. We'll see, Lucas replied with confidence. I'm a man who keeps his promises. As they left the hotel, Clara noticed the changed expressions of the townsfolk who had mocked her earlier. Their jeers had transformed into curious glances and whispered conversations. Whatever Lucas Vaughn's reputation might be, it clearly commanded respect. They rode to Clara's cabin, where she quickly gathered her possessions into a single trunk while Lucas waited outside. The sparse belongings of her life fit easily into the small container, a testament to how little she had to show for her 22 years. As she closed the trunk on her old life, Clara allowed herself one final moment of grief for her father, for the dreams they'd shared that would never come to pass. Then, squaring her shoulders, she carried the trunk outside. Lucas loaded it onto his horse, securing it carefully before helping Clara mount once more. The journey to the Davidson property took them through town again and then along the river that wound its way through the valley. As Georgetown fell behind them, Clara felt the weight of the town's judgment easing from her shoulders. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and the smaller cabin Lucas had mentioned. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, making the weathered wood glow warmly. "It needs work," Lucas acknowledged as they approached. "But the bones are good." Clara could see what he meant. Though somewhat neglected after sitting empty, the property had clearly been built with care and had weathered the harsh mountain seasons well. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Lucas guided the horse to the smaller cabin first. "Let's get you settled. I had some supplies delivered earlier today, so there should be basic necessities inside." The cabin was simple but clean, a main room with a small stove, table, and chair, and a separate bedroom with a bed already made up with fresh linens. A window in each room offered views of the mountains and the main house. "This will do nicely," Clara said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table. "Thank you." Lucas carried her trunk inside, setting it by the bed. "There's a pump out back for water, and I've had firewood stacked beside the door. Once you're settled, perhaps you'll join me for supper at the main house. We can discuss the details of your duties." Clara nodded. "I'll just need a moment to freshen up." After Lucas left, Clara quickly unpacked her few possessions. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, but was at least clean, and washed her face, trying to erase the evidence of her earlier tears. When she felt presentable, she made her way to the main house. The interior was spacious but largely unfurnished, with only the essential pieces in place. Lucas had a fire going in the large stone fireplace, casting warm light through the main room. "I hope to have the place properly furnished within a month or two," he explained as he showed her around. "For now, we'll make do with the basics." In the kitchen, Lucas had prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. "I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited," he apologized as they sat at the large oak table. "If cooking is to be among my duties, this will improve," Clara promised, tasting the beans that were under-seasoned but not unpalatable. "About those duties," Lucas began, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "I've drafted the terms we discussed. Please review them and tell me if they're agreeable." Clara carefully read the document. The terms were generous, more than fair, outlining her responsibilities for household management, correspondence, bookkeeping, and meal preparation. In exchange, she would receive room, board, and a monthly salary that exceeded what she'd earned as a seamstress. "This is more than I expected," she admitted. "It's what the position is worth," Lucas replied simply. "I value competence and loyalty, and I pay accordingly." Clara signed the document, and Lucas did the same, providing her with her own copy. As they finished their meal, Lucas rose and retrieved something from a shelf, a leather-bound book. "I noticed you mentioned your father's books earlier. Are you fond of reading?" Clara nodded. "Very much so. It was one of our few luxuries." Lucas handed her the book, a collection of Mark Twain's writings. "This always makes me laugh. Perhaps it will fulfill my promise before the day ends." Clara accepted the book, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you. It's been some time since I've had something new to read." As they continued talking, Lucas shared stories of his life in Texas, tales of cattle drives and frontier characters that were by turns harrowing and humorous. One story about a particularly stubborn mule that had followed him for miles after eating his hat brought an unexpected laugh from Clara's lips. The sound surprised her, and she covered her mouth quickly, but Lucas's smile widened. "There it is," he said softly. "I told you you'd laugh before sundown." Clara glanced out the window to see the last golden rays of the sun sinking behind the mountains. "So I have," she acknowledged, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. "You keep your promises, Mr. Vaughn." "Lucas," he corrected once more, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. And yes, I always do. In that moment, surrounded by the soft glow of lamplight in a house that was neither hers nor truly his yet, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. The first week at the ranch passed in a flurry of activity. Clara threw herself into her duties, determined to prove her worth. She scoured the main house from top to bottom, washing years of dust from the windows and scrubbing floors until they gleamed. She organized the pantry with the supplies Lucas had ordered from town, established a system for his correspondence, and began keeping meticulous records of his expenditures and plans. Lucas, for his part, worked from dawn until dusk outside. He repaired fences, cleared overgrown fields, and prepared for the arrival of the first cattle herd, which was due in 2 weeks. Each evening, they would share a meal that Clara prepared, discussing the day's progress and planning for the next. Clara found Lucas to be a considerate employer. He valued her opinions, listened when she spoke, and never questioned her competence. After the skepticism and mockery she'd endured in town, his respect was refreshing. Still, she maintained a careful professional distance, reminding herself that this was employment, not friendship. On the 8th day, Lucas informed her that they needed to return to Georgetown for supplies. Clara's stomach knotted at the prospect of facing the townspeople again, but she knew it was inevitable. They rode into town together on Lucas's chestnut stallion, which she now knew was named Rusty. Clara sat behind Lucas this time, holding onto the back of the saddle rather than his waist, maintaining the proper decorum she felt their working relationship required. As they passed the assayer's office, the same men who had mocked her before tipped their hats respectfully to Lucas. Their eyes lingered on Clara with curiosity rather than derision. "Mr. Vaughn," one called, "heard you're expecting a cattle shipment soon." "That's right, Mr. Peters," Lucas replied cordially. "Should arrive next week if the weather holds." "Might be looking for work myself," the man ventured. "Got experience with cattle?" Lucas nodded. "Stop by the ranch tomorrow. We'll talk." Clara marveled at the transformation. The very men who had delighted in her tears now sought employment from Lucas, treating her with cautious respect by association. At the general store, Lucas handed Clara a list. "Would you select what we need for the house? I'll arrange for the feed and tools." Clara moved through the store, carefully selecting items from Lucas's list and adding a few she knew they needed. As she reached for a bolt of cloth to make new curtains for the main house, she heard whispers behind her. "That's Clara Barton, living out at the Vaughn ranch now. I heard she's his housekeeper." "Housekeeper? Is that what they're calling it these days?" Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression neutral as she continued her shopping. When she approached the counter, the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Thompson, gave her a cold smile. "Will Mr. Vaughn be paying for these items?" she asked pointedly. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson," Clara replied evenly. "Please add them to his account." The woman sniffed disapprovingly. "Of course. How convenient for you." Clara bit her tongue, gathering her dignity. "Mr. Vaughn and I have a professional arrangement. I manage his household affairs." "I'm sure you do," Mrs. Thompson replied with barely disguised contempt. "That will be all, Mrs. Thompson," Lucas's deep voice interrupted as he approached the counter. "Is there a problem with my housekeeper's selections?" The woman's demeanor instantly changed. "Not at all, Mr. Vaughn. We're just so pleased to have new business in town." "Good." Lucas's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. "Then I trust Miss Barton will be treated with the same courtesy you extend to me whenever she shops here in the future." Mrs. Thompson nodded quickly. Of course, of course." Outside, as their purchases were being loaded onto a wagon Lucas had arranged to borrow, Clara finally spoke. "They think I'm that we're." "I know what they think," Lucas said calmly. "People will gossip. It's the nature of small towns." "It doesn't bother you?" Clara asked, surprised by his nonchalance. Lucas adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the midday sun. "The opinions of people who would mock a grieving woman don't concern me much. But if it bothers you, I could speak to the minister about making an announcement regarding your position." Clara considered this, then shook her head. "No, that would only lend credibility to their whispers. Better to prove them wrong through our actions." Lucas smiled approvingly. "I agree. Now, let's finish our errands and get back to the ranch. I've invited a few potential ranch hands to come by tomorrow, and we should prepare." As they continued through town, Clara noticed Lucas stopping to speak with several men, introducing himself and inquiring about their skills. By the time they departed Georgetown that afternoon, he had arranged for 5 men to visit the ranch the following day to discuss employment. "You're building quite an operation," Clara observed as they rode home, the loaded wagon following behind, driven by one of the men Lucas had just hired temporarily. "A ranch needs good men," Lucas replied, "and a town needs a successful ranch. It benefits everyone." "They certainly treat you differently than they treated my father," Clara noted, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Money and success open doors that remain closed to those struggling. It's not right, but it's the way of things." "Is that why you helped me?" Clara asked suddenly. "Because you could afford to?" Lucas turned slightly in the saddle to look at her. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. My means made it possible, but not mandatory." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Not everyone with means chooses to help others, Clara." The use of her first name, which he had been careful to avoid since their first day, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me when others looked away." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the most valuable things are those others fail to recognize." The moment stretched between them, filled with something Clara couldn't quite name. Then Lucas turned forward again, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. The next day brought a flurry of activity as the prospective ranch hands arrived. Clara prepared coffee and a hearty midday meal while Lucas interviewed each man. By evening, he had hired for, including, surprisingly, Mr. Peters, who had mocked Clara that day in town. "Are you certain about him?" Clara asked as they ate dinner after the men had left. Lucas nodded. "Peters knows cattle, and he was direct about his past behavior. Said he was ashamed of how he treated you and wanted to make amends." Clara raised an eyebrow skeptically. "And you believed him?" "I believe in giving people a chance to prove themselves," Lucas replied. "But he'll be watched carefully, and at the first sign of disrespect toward you, he'll be gone." Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch transformed. The hired hands repaired outbuildings, cleared more land, and prepared for the cattle arrival. Clara settled into her role, finding unexpected satisfaction in creating order from chaos. The main house began to feel less like an empty shell and more like a home as she added small touches: wildflowers in mason jars, neatly arranged bookshelves, curtains she sewed from the fabric purchased in town. Lucas seemed to appreciate her efforts, often commenting on some small change she had made. Their evening conversations grew longer, extending beyond ranch business to personal histories and philosophies. Clara learned that Lucas had lost his parents within months of each other, his father to heart failure, his mother to grief shortly after. He had sold their Texas ranch, unable to bear the memories, and sought a fresh start in Colorado. In turn, Clara shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her mother's long illness, and her father's desperate quest for silver that had ultimately killed him. Lucas listened attentively, offering neither pity nor platitudes, just understanding. When the cattle finally arrived, 50 head of prime Hereford stock, the ranch truly came alive. The days grew longer as everyone worked to settle the animals, but Clara found herself energized rather than exhausted. Each evening, watching the sun set over the mountains from her cabin porch, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a month. One evening, as June gave way to July, Lucas knocked on her cabin door. When she opened it, he stood holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you today," he explained, handing it to her. "From Denver." Clara accepted it with surprise. "I'm not expecting anything." "Open it," Lucas encouraged, remaining on her doorstep. Clara untied the string and carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen in a velvet case. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper sometimes in the evenings," Lucas explained when she looked up at him in confusion. "Thought you might appreciate something proper to write in." The thoughtfulness of the gift left Clara momentarily speechless. "Lucas, this is too generous." "Nonsense," he replied with a small smile. "Consider it a token of appreciation for transforming the ranch house into something habitable." Clara ran her fingers over the soft leather cover. "Thank you. Truly." Lucas shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. There's something else. I've been invited to dinner at the mayor's house next Saturday. Apparently, being the largest cattle rancher in the area now warrants such invitations. I'd like you to accompany me. Clara stared at him in surprise. As your housekeeper? As my guest, Lucas clarified. It would be helpful to have someone who knows the town's history and relationships beside me. He paused. But I understand if you'd rather not face some of those people socially. Clara considered the offer carefully. A month ago, she would have refused immediately. The thought of sitting at a table with people who had mocked her grief would have been unbearable. But now, with the security of her position and Lucas's evident respect, the prospect seemed less daunting. I would be happy to accompany you, she decided, though I don't have anything appropriate to wear for such an occasion. Lucas smiled. There's a dressmaker in Central City who could help with that. We could ride over tomorrow if you're willing. You don't need to buy me clothing, Lucas, Clara protested. My salary. Consider it a business expense, Lucas interrupted gently. If you're to represent the ranch at social functions, appropriate attire is necessary. Clara wanted to argue further, but recognized the practicality of his suggestion. Very well. Thank you. The trip to Central City the next day was a welcome break from ranch routine. The larger mining town was bustling with activity, its streets lined with more substantial buildings than Georgetown could boast. The dressmaker, a French woman named Madame Fournier, clucked her tongue when Clara explained their need for a dress within the week. Impossible, she declared, before Lucas quietly mentioned a substantial bonus for rapid work. Suddenly, the impossible became merely challenging. Clara was measured and pinned into sample garments, while Lucas waited patiently in the front of the shop. Madame Fournier insisted on a deep green silk that complemented Mademoiselle's coloring perfectly and promised to have it ready in 5 days. As they left the shop, Lucas suggested lunch at Central City's finest hotel. The dining room was elegant, with crisp white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Clara felt out of place in her simple dress, but tried to mask her discomfort. You seem tense, Lucas observed as they were served. I'm not accustomed to such establishments, Clara admitted. My father and I lived simply. Lucas's expression softened. You belong anywhere you choose to be, Clara. Never doubt that. The conviction in his voice gave her courage, and as the meal progressed, Clara found herself relaxing. They discussed books they had both read, debated the merits of different cattle breeds, and laughed over Lucas's story about his first disastrous cattle drive as a young man. By the time they returned to the ranch that evening, something had shifted subtly between them. The professional distance Clara had carefully maintained felt less necessary, less natural. As Lucas helped her down from Rusty, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly proper, and Clara found she didn't mind. The green silk dress arrived as promised, delivered by Madame Fournier's assistant. Clara tried it on in the privacy of her cabin, marveling at the transformation. The skilled dressmaker had created something both elegant and flattering, a deep forest green that made Clara's hazel eyes appear more green than brown and complemented her chestnut hair. When Saturday evening arrived, Clara felt a flutter of nerves as she prepared for the dinner. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, secured with her mother's pearl hairpins, one of the few valuable items she had kept after her father's death. The dress fit perfectly, making her feel more confident than she had in years. A knock at her door announced Lucas's arrival. When she opened it, the expression on his face made her breath catch. He stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes wide with appreciation. You look beautiful, he said finally, his voice lower than usual. Thank you, Clara replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. You look quite handsome yourself. Lucas was dressed in a fine black suit, his usually tousled hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed precisely. He offered his arm with a small bow. Shall we? The mayor's house was the largest private residence in Georgetown, a testament to the profits of successful mining ventures. As their borrowed carriage approached, Clara felt her anxiety returning. Remember, Lucas said quietly as he helped her down. You have nothing to prove to these people. You're here as my guest, and that's all that matters. His words steadied her, and Clara held her head high as they entered. The mayor's wife, Mrs. Hollingsworth, greeted them with evident curiosity, her eyes lingering on Clara with surprise. Mr. Vaughn, How delightful you could join us, she said warmly before turning a cooler gaze to Clara. And Miss Barton, what an unexpected pleasure. Miss Barton was kind enough to accompany me, Lucas replied smoothly. I rely on her knowledge of local matters extensively. The subtle emphasis on her value did not go unnoticed by either woman. Mrs. Hollingsworth's smile tightened, but she nodded and directed them to the parlor where other guests were gathered. Clara recognized most of the faces: the bank manager who had evicted her, the general store owner and his wife, the town doctor and his family. Their expressions ranged from shocked to disapproving to merely curious. Lucas kept her hand firmly on his arm, a silent statement of support as they moved through the room. He introduced her not as his housekeeper, but simply as Miss Clara Barton, who assists me in managing the ranch. Throughout the evening, Clara observed the deference shown to Lucas, the eager questions about his plans for the ranch, the subtle attempts to curry favor. She also noted the gradual shift in how she was treated, as Lucas consistently demonstrated his respect for her opinions, including her in conversations and deferring to her knowledge of local matters. The other guests began to follow his lead. By the time dinner was served, Clara found herself seated beside the bank manager's wife, who leaned over to whisper, "That color is absolutely stunning on you, Miss Barton. I must say, I've never seen you look so well." The backhanded compliment might have stung a month ago, but now Clara merely smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Wells. Madame Fournier in Central City is a marvel with fabrics." Across the table, Lucas caught her eye and gave her a subtle wink that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. In that moment, Clara realized that he had orchestrated this entire evening not just for business connections, but to restore her standing in the community. The dinner conversation ranged from mining prospects to railroad expansions to cattle prices. When the topic turned to the drought affecting southern Colorado, Clara mentioned something her father had told her about irrigation techniques used by farmers in Pennsylvania. "That's fascinating," the mayor said, seeming genuinely interested. "Do you think such methods could work with our terrain, Mr. Vaughn?" Lucas smiled. "Miss Barton is the one with knowledge on the subject. Perhaps direct your question to her." The slight discomfort that flickered across the mayor's face was quickly replaced with polite interest as he turned to Clara. "What do you think, Miss Barton?" Clara explained what she knew clearly and confidently, conscious of Lucas's approving gaze. By the time dessert was served, she had contributed to several conversations and received thoughtful questions in return, a far cry from the mockery she had endured just a month earlier. As they rode home under a canopy of stars, Clara finally spoke the thought that had been forming throughout the evening. "You arranged all of that deliberately, didn't you? To change how they see me?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I arranged for them to see what I see: an intelligent, capable woman whose worth they've overlooked." "Why?" Clara asked softly. "Why does it matter to you how they treat me?" The carriage rolled along the dark road, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the creaking of wheels. Lucas seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "When I first saw you on the street that day, being mocked for your tears, something in me responded, not just with anger at their cruelty, but with recognition." He paused. "I know what it is to grieve and feel alone. To have others dismiss your pain as weakness." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep in Clara's heart. "After your parents?" Lucas nodded. "Some said I was foolish to sell the family ranch, that I was throwing away my father's legacy out of sentiment. They didn't understand that every corner of that place held memories I couldn't face daily." Clara reached across the carriage and placed her hand over his. "I understand." Lucas turned his hand to clasp hers, his palm warm against her fingers. "I know you do. That's why I wanted to help. No one should be mocked for feeling deeply." They rode the rest of the way in silence, hands still joined in the darkness of the carriage. When they reached the ranch, Lucas walked Clara to her cabin door. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied the stiffness of his words. "You were magnificent." "Thank you for everything," Clara replied softly. "For the opportunity, the dress, the confidence you've shown in me." Lucas hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Clara." As she watched him walk back toward the main house, Clara felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man himself. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with Lucas Vaughn. July stretched into August, bringing long, hot days and the steady rhythm of ranch life. The cattle thrived on the mountain pastures, and Lucas's reputation as a fair employer drew more men seeking work. Soon, the bunkhouse was filled with ranch hands, and the property hummed with productive activity. Clara's role expanded as the ranch grew. Beyond managing the household and accounts, she began overseeing supplies for the bunkhouse, organizing work schedules, and handling correspondence with cattle buyers. Lucas valued her efficiency and often consulted her on decisions beyond her official duties. Their evening conversations continued, growing deeper and more personal with each passing night. Sometimes they would sit on the main house porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery colors while discussing everything from books to politics to personal philosophies. Other times, they would linger at the dinner table, so engrossed in conversation that the candles burned low before they noticed the hour. Clara found herself looking forward to these times with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. Lucas had become more than her employer. He was her friend, her confidant, the person whose opinion mattered most to her. And yet, she reminded herself, she was still his housekeeper. The difference in their stations remained, regardless of how he treated her. One evening in late August, a sudden thunderstorm rolled over the mountains, bringing sheets of rain that drummed against the roof of Clara's cabin. She had just settled in with a book when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Lucas standing there, soaked from the brief walk between the main house and her cabin, holding a covered basket. "I thought you might like some company during the storm," he explained, water dripping from his hat brim. "And I brought apple pie." Clara laughed, stepping back to let him enter. "You're drenched. Let me get you a towel." She retrieved a clean towel from her small chest of drawers, offering it to him as he removed his wet hat and jacket, hanging them by the door. The domesticity of the moment, Lucas drying his hair in her cabin while rain pattered against the windows, felt both strange and somehow right. "I wasn't expecting visitors," Clara said, suddenly self-conscious of her simple surroundings. "The fire's barely started." "It's perfect," Lucas assured her, moving to stoke the small blaze in her stove. Much cozier than the main house during a storm. Clara cut 2 slices of the still warm pie while Lucas built up the fire. They settled at her small table, the storm creating a private world around them. As they ate, Lucas studied her face in the golden lamplight. "You look happy," he observed. "More so than when we first met." Clara considered this. "I am happy. I have purpose here, respect. Thanks to you." Lucas shook his head. "You've earned both through your own merits. I merely provided opportunity." "Nevertheless," Clara insisted, "you changed my life that day. I don't know where I would be if you hadn't intervened." "Perhaps fate would have found another way to bring you to a better place," Lucas suggested, his eyes never leaving hers. "I find it hard to believe someone like you would remain downtrodden for long." "Someone like me?" Clara echoed questioningly. Lucas set down his fork, his expression turning serious. "Someone with your strength, your intelligence, your compassion." The intensity in his gaze made Clara's heart quicken. "Lucas, I've been wanting to speak to you about something," he continued, his voice lower. "About the future." A crash of thunder punctuated his words, making them both start. Lucas laughed, breaking the tension. "Perhaps the heavens are telling me the timing isn't right." Clara smiled, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. "What about the future?" Lucas seemed to reconsider, shaking his head slightly. "Nothing that can't wait for a less dramatic moment." He gestured toward the bookshelf where she kept her small collection. "What are you reading these days?" They fell back into their comfortable pattern of conversation, discussing literature and sharing stories until the storm began to subside. As Lucas prepared to leave, the rain now a gentle patter rather than a downpour, he paused at the door. "There's a harvest dance in town next weekend," he said casually. "Would you consider attending with me?" Clara hesitated. Their appearance at the mayor's dinner had somewhat rehabilitated her standing in Georgetown, but a dance was different, more intimate, more socially significant. "As your housekeeper?" she asked, needing clarity. Lucas's expression grew serious. "No, Clara, not as my housekeeper." The implication hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Clara took a deep breath. Then yes, I would be honored to attend with you. The smile that illuminated Lucas's face was worth whatever gossip might follow. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently before slipping out into the damp night. Clara stood in the doorway, watching his tall figure move through the misty darkness toward the main house, her heart racing with emotions she could no longer deny. The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety for Clara. She wore the green silk dress again, having no other formal attire, but added a different lace collar and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than she had for the mayor's dinner. When Lucas came to escort her to town, his admiring gaze made her flush with pleasure. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Thank you," Clara replied, feeling the weight of the evening ahead. "Though I confess I'm nervous about how people will interpret our attendance together." Lucas helped her into the carriage before replying, "Let them interpret as they wish. I know my intentions." The cryptic response did nothing to calm Clara's racing heart, but the warmth in Lucas's eyes gave her courage. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with golden harvest decorations, lanterns casting a warm glow, and a small band playing lively tunes. As they entered, Clara felt the familiar weight of stares, but the reaction seemed different now, curious rather than judgmental, speculative rather than dismissive. Mrs. Thompson from the general store approached them immediately. "Mr. Vaughn, Miss Barton, how lovely to see you both." Her smile seemed genuine as she addressed Clara. "That green is still so becoming on you, my dear." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," Clara replied, pleasantly surprised by the warm greeting. Throughout the evening, Clara found herself welcomed into conversations and groups that would have excluded her just months before. Lucas remained attentive at her side, introducing her to newcomers in town and making sure she was never left alone. When the band struck up a waltz, Lucas turned to Clara with a formal bow. "May I have this dance, Miss Barton?" Clara placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. As his arm slipped around her waist and he guided her into the first steps of the waltz, she was acutely aware of the eyes following them. "Everyone is watching," she murmured, trying to focus on the dance steps. "Because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," Lucas replied, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "And because they're all wondering the same thing." "What's that?" Clara asked, breathless from more than just the dance. "Why a man like me is fortunate enough to have the attention of a woman like you," Lucas said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. The sincerity in his voice made Clara miss a step, but Lucas's strong lead kept her moving smoothly. "I think you have that backwards," she managed to say. "I'm the fortunate one." Lucas's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Then perhaps we're both fortunate." As they continued to dance, the room seemed to fade around them. Clara was aware only of Lucas, the strength of his hand at her back, the warmth of his body near hers, the intensity in his eyes as they never left her face. When the music ended, neither moved immediately, locked in a moment that felt significant in ways Clara couldn't fully articulate. Later, as they stood by the refreshment table, Mayor Hollingsworth approached with his wife. "Vaughn," he greeted heartily. "Good to see you and Miss Barton enjoying yourselves. I was hoping to discuss your irrigation ideas further. Perhaps you could stop by my office next week." "I'd be happy to," Lucas replied, though the irrigation concept was Miss Barton's suggestion, as you'll recall. Perhaps she should join us for the discussion. The mayor looked momentarily surprised, but recovered quickly. Of course. Both of you would be most welcome." As they moved away, Clara gave Lucas a questioning look. "You didn't need to include me in that invitation, didn't I?" Lucas replied mildly. "Your knowledge of the techniques exceeds mine. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I find I prefer your company in all things." The simple statement, delivered so casually, made Clara's heart flutter. Before she could respond, the band started another tune, a lively reel that had couples quickly forming lines. "Shall we?" Lucas asked, offering his hand once more. They danced until Clara's cheeks were flushed and her feet began to ache pleasantly in her best shoes. Throughout the evening, Lucas never left her side except to fetch refreshments or when gentlemanly courtesy required him to dance with the wives of important townsmen. Even then, his eyes would find hers across the room, a silent reassurance of his return. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, several people approached to bid them farewell, including Mr. Peters, who now worked at the ranch. "Miss Barton," he said, removing his hat, "I wanted to apologize properly for my behavior that day on the street. It was unkind and unworthy of a gentleman." Clara was startled by the public apology. "Thank you, Mr. Peters. I appreciate your words. You've proven yourself a valuable member of the ranch," Lucas added, placing a supportive hand at the small of Clara's back. "Your work with the herd has been excellent." Peters nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. Good night to you both." As they rode home under a sky brilliant with stars, Clara felt a sense of contentment unlike anything she'd experienced before. The carriage rolled through the quiet night, the only sounds the horse's steady pace and the occasional call of a night bird. "You've changed how they see me," Clara said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "First you made them laugh, and now you've made them respect me." Lucas turned to face her in the moonlight. "I did nothing but show them what was already there." The change was in their perception, not in you. "Still," Clara insisted, "you gave me the chance to show them who I truly am." "And who are you, Clara Barton?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle in the darkness. Clara considered the question seriously. "I'm a woman who lost everything and found herself in the process. I'm stronger than I knew, more capable than I believed." She paused. "And I'm someone who has learned to trust again, thanks to you." Lucas's hand found hers in the shadows between them. "I promised you would laugh before sundown on the day we met. Do you remember?" "Of course," Clara replied. "You kept your promise." "I want to make you another promise," Lucas said, his voice deepening with emotion. "If you'll allow it." Clara's heart began to race. What promise would that be? The carriage was approaching the ranch now, the outlines of buildings visible in the moonlight. Lucas directed the driver to stop a short distance from the main house, helping Clara down before dismissing the man to take the carriage to the stable. They stood alone in the silvery light, the mountains a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. Lucas took both of Clara's hands in his expression serious. "When I first saw you that day in town, something in me recognized something in you," he began. "Not just your sorrow, which mirrored my own in many ways, but your dignity, your strength even in vulnerability." He took a breath. "I offered you employment then because it was what you needed, what I could provide." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "But these past months, working beside you, talking with you, watching you transform the ranch into a home." Lucas continued, his hands tightening around hers. "Clara, you've become essential to me in ways that have nothing to do with your position. I find myself thinking of you constantly, looking forward to our conversations, missing you when you're not near." Clara's breath caught in her throat as Lucas took a step closer. "I know there's been an inequality between us employer and employee that has prevented me from speaking these words sooner," he said. "But I can't remain silent any longer." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I love you, Clara Barton. Not as my housekeeper, not as my secretary, but as the remarkable woman you are." The words Clara had scarcely allowed herself to hope for hung in the night air between them. Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward with dizzying speed. "Lucas," she whispered, "are you certain? I have nothing to offer but myself." His smile was tender in the moonlight. "You are everything I want, everything I need. I fell in love with you gradually, day by day, conversation by conversation. And now I cannot imagine a future without you in it." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not tears of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming joy. "I love you too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I've tried not to, knowing my position, but my heart wouldn't listen to reason." Lucas laughed softly, his thumb brushing away a tear that spilled onto her cheek. "Then your heart is wiser than your reason." He hesitated, suddenly seeming less confident. "Clara, would you consider becoming my wife? Not my housekeeper, but my partner in all things." Clara's heart soared at the words. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I would be honored to be your wife." The joy that transformed Lucas's face was breathtaking. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he lowered his face to hers. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. Clara's arms slid around his neck as he pulled her closer, the mountain night wrapping around them like a blanket of stars. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the thunderstorm," he confessed. "Perhaps even before that." Clara smiled, feeling a happiness so complete it seemed to radiate from within her. "I wouldn't have stopped you." Lucas laughed, the sound rich with joy. "Now you tell me." Hand in hand, they walked toward the main house, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the western sky. Clara thought of that day in Georgetown, how close she had come to despair, how the cruelty of strangers had nearly broken her spirit. "They mocked me for crying," she said softly, remembering. "And you promised I would laugh before sundown." Lucas squeezed her hand. "And now?" Clara looked up at the man she loved, at the home they had built together, at the life that awaited them. "Now I believe I'll be laughing for a lifetime." Lucas's wedding gift to Clara was the deed to the ranch, transferred into both their names, a true partnership in every sense. They were married in October of 1876, when the aspen trees had turned to gold and the mountains wore their first dusting of snow. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Reverend Williams from Georgetown officiating and the entire town seemingly in attendance. Clara wore a gown of ivory silk, another creation from Madame Fournier, who had become a friend during the wedding preparations. Mrs. Thompson supplied the wedding cake, Mayor Hollingsworth gave a toast, and even Mr. Peters shed a tear during the vows. As Clara and Lucas spoke their promises to one another under an arch decorated with autumn flowers, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just 5 months. From desperate grief to boundless joy, from mockery to respect, from solitude to loving partnership. Their first year of marriage brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Lucas handling the cattle operations and Clara overseeing the finances and household with a new authority as Mrs. Vaughn. They hired a young woman from town to help with the domestic work, promoting Clara fully to the position of ranch co-owner and manager. In the spring of 1877, they expanded the main house, adding a library filled with books that Lucas ordered from Denver and San Francisco. The room quickly became their favorite retreat during the long winter evenings, where they would read aloud to each other by the fire or simply talk for hours about their dreams for the future. That same spring brought news that Central City was opening a new school, and they needed qualified teachers. Remembering Clara's experience as a teacher's assistant, Lucas encouraged her to apply for a position. "But the ranch needs me," Clara protested, though the idea appealed to her. "The ranch will always be here," Lucas assured her. "If teaching is something that calls to you, you should pursue it." With her husband's support, Clara secured a position teaching 3 days a week. The schedule allowed her to maintain her duties at the ranch while fulfilling a passion for education she had set aside years before. Her students, children of miners and shopkeepers, quickly grew to adore their teacher, who made learning an adventure rather than a chore. By the autumn of 1877, Clara had more news to share. She was expecting their first child. Lucas's joy knew no bounds. He insisted on hiring additional help at the ranch, allowing Clara to reduce her teaching schedule as her pregnancy progressed. Their son, Thomas James Vaughn, was born in April of 1878, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Clara discovered new depths of love as she watched Lucas cradle their son, singing softly to him in the rocking chair Lucas had crafted himself during the winter evenings. As Thomas grew, the ranch expanded further. Lucas's breeding program produced cattle sought after throughout Colorado and beyond. He added horses to their operation, developing a line of strong, intelligent mounts that commanded premium prices. Clara's financial acumen ensured their prosperity was wisely managed, with investments in mining operations, railroad stocks, and land that would secure their future for generations. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose, joined the family in 1880, completing their happiness. With 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a love that deepened with each passing year, Clara and Lucas built a life that stood as testament to what compassion, determination, and true partnership could achieve. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Lucas surprised Clara with a journal bound in green leather, the same shade as the dress she had worn to the mayor's dinner. Inside, he had written on the first page, "To my beloved Clara, who taught me that tears can lead to laughter, and that true strength lies in the courage to feel deeply. 5 years ago, they mocked you for crying, and I promised you would laugh before sundown. Every day since, your laughter has been the greatest gift of my life. All my love, always, Lucas. Clara, reading the inscription with their children playing at her feet and the ranch stretching prosperous and peaceful around them, felt a fullness of heart that once would have seemed impossible. She looked up at Lucas, the man who had seen her worth when others looked away, who had offered respect when others gave mockery, who had built with her a life of purpose and joy. "Thank you," she said simply, "for keeping your promise." Lucas smiled, taking her hand in his. "Which one? I've made you so many." Clara leaned forward to kiss him gently. "All of them. Every single one." And as the Colorado sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Clara Vaughn's laughter mingled with her children's, carrying across the land she and Lucas had made their own a sound of pure happiness that had begun with one man's promise on a tearful day long ago.